Good morning and a very warm welcome to everyone. We are very excited to be kicking off this webinar series today and to be providing an introduction to the local and subnational government roadmap to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. My name is Timothy Blatch and I'm with ICLEI Africa and ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Centre. And I will be facilitating the webinar today. As you can see on your screens, today's agenda, we have two presentations. Firstly, Kobe Brandt, the Director of ICLEI Africa and the Director of ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Centre, will be presenting on behalf of Oliver Hillel from the SCBD on the UN's post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and elements for stronger contribution of local and subnational governments there too. Following that, Ingrid Coetzee, Senior Program Manager of ICLEI's Cities Biodiversity Centre, will be providing an overview of contributions by local and subnational constituency between now and COP15. So we are thrilled to have you all join us today, and I think without further ado, we will begin. So let me start first by saying that this webinar will be recorded, and for all those who have registered for the webinar, we will send the recording along with the presentations and some additional information at a later stage. And then there will be two ways in which you can participate in the webinar. We will start to take questions once both presentations are done. And there's two ways in which you can ask questions. The first being the chat room that you will see on the right-hand side of your screen. So feel free to post questions in there. Otherwise, there's the option to raise your hand as well, which we will take questions as soon as both presentations are done. So we're going to kick off with Kobe Brandt, as I said, the Director of ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Centre and the Regional Director of ICLEI Africa, and she is going to be presenting on the UN's post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and elements for stronger contributions of local and subnational governments. So over to you, Kobe.
Thank you very much, Timothy, and also to everybody that organized it and everybody that's tuned into this webinar. We are aware that we deliberately organized it so that there's also the same webinar presented later in the day, in about 12 or less, for just to accommodate everybody around the world to listen in. And I just want to say that we are doing these webinars in partnership with a range of partners, and in this instance we are partnering definitely very closely with the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity as a first webinar to explain to you why these webinars, where do we fit in as a local and subnational government constituency into these webinars, and what is the Secretariat of the CBD and why is 2020 so important. So that's going to be my job, but I'm doing it not in my own capacity. I'm doing it on behalf of a close colleague and friend of ours, Mr. Oliver Hillel, who many of you know as the focal point within the Convention Secretariat for local and subnational governments. So Oliver is very much asleep in Montreal at the moment. I think it's about 2 o'clock his time, and he's asked me to stand in for him. However, you will, as participants of this webinar, have access to the webinar that is also taking place later in the day, in which Oliver will actually present his own slides as well. So I trust that you will look at those slides as well, and I'll try and do my best to do his slides justice. So thanks, Timothy. I think we can move to the next one. So right, so just for those who are on the line and who do not know what the convention is, it's the Convention on Biological Diversity is one of the 3 Rio conventions, so-called Rio conventions, that came out of the Rio Earth talks in 1992, when the world got together and decided that they needed to live, people needed to live more harmony with nature and the world within the planet Earth, basically. And the idea of major conventions, the CBD is the one that convenes our human relationship with nature and biodiversity, which in the simplest terms can be described as the web of life which underpins all life on Earth, and the UNCCD. And that one, together with the other two, are known as the Rio Convention. After that, the United Nations, there's the process which was not so long ago, still sort of under sort of convened convention, but it's now moved to the SDG or Sustainable Development Goals process governed under UNESCO, UNDESA of the United Nations. So, Convention on Biodiversity, they together in 2011, Goya, at one of COPs, COP 11, they actually came up with the world came up with an agreement that there would be a decade for biodiversity, declared decade from 2011 to 2020, and that 2020 is now creeping up on us. We have 2 years, or well, just over a year and a half really, to get to the end of that decade. And what made that decade specifically meaningful was that it was a decade that called on the mainstreaming of biodiversity into all aspects of business of the United Nations, meaning into all the other conventions and treaties and protocols and programs and departments of the United Nations that exists. So the parties or the states, the nation states of the world really bought into and put their weight behind the Convention on Biological Diversity for the last 9 years, 8.5 years. And it's now time to take stock, and it's now time to look at what goes beyond 2020. Because there was also in Nagoya an agreement to adopt a new set of targets and indicators, and those are called the ICLEI targets, the biological targets, biodiversity targets, and they each have their set of indicators, and many of these are either coming to an end now or by defact in 2030. So it is now the moment when we gather in China for the next COP, for COP 15, which will take place towards 2020, to come up with a new set of indicators or a new process or a new framework agreement that will determine how we as human beings, basically all of us, engage with nature. And of course that also goes for cities and all levels of subnational governments. And Ingrid will tell you later what we are proposing as ICLEI from our side as a contribution towards helping gather a strong voice on behalf of and with all subnational and local governments and their agencies and their partners. So I just want to stress that these webinars are also open to organizations who are not from local or subnational governments, but who are with us, who are in it with us, who work closely with us, align yourselves with us, partner with us, and even support us. So nation states or parties to the convention are also most welcome to join these regular webinars, which will carry on to take place roughly once a month until we reach our milestone in 2020, so that we can go collectively with a very, very strong voice into the discussions that will lead up to 2020, and certainly be in China as a strong constituency whose voice needs to be heard and whose actions need to be part of that post-2020 regime. So Oliver has put out here, in terms of tools, basically a timeline for us, which looks at from the perspective of the CBD Convention, looks at all the different processes which are going to take place. And I'm not taking you through all of them, but I just want to highlight the fact we are in the process now, started already in 2018, where there's a lot of work going on around indicators, around what should be the next indicators, should there be even new indicators, or are the indicators captured in the IT targets still the same ones to be kept? Because as we know, our IT targets are very likely not to be met by 2020. And the world is also busy at the moment through the nation state to deliver the 6 national biodiversity strategy and action plans. And those strategy and action plans will greatly inform the process and the voice that goes into the process, the statements and the priority processes for 2020. 2019 is a very important year of reflection, review, talking with each other, meeting through regional consultations. The CBD at the moment is organizing regional consultations in all parts of the world. There were already very successful ones held, for instance, in I think in Japan it was, and in for Eastern Asia and in Europe. And there will be many more taking place in all corners of the world. There will be global consultations with stakeholders, sectoral stakeholders as well. And in 2020, a global biodiversity report, the next GBO, or Global Biodiversity, as they are called, GBO 5, will be produced, which is basically a check-in or a state of the world, the state of biodiversity in the world. And this is basically which will all collectively inform a first draft of the new agreement, which will be discussed in depth at Substa 2024, which is the formal preparatory process which happens annually, technical preparatory process which happens annually every year, but at least also 6 months before the next COP. So we have 2 Substas coming up, Substa 23, which is set for later this year, around August, September, and then Substa 24, where the GBO 5 will, and the first draft will be out unpublished. So both these 2 Substas are, of course, very high on our radar. And I want to make one last point before we go to the next slide, Paul, Tim, and that is that it is very clear that in each single one of these processes, our cities and our subnational governments at all levels are actually really key players, and we are trying to facilitate the process here. You can see more details. We're trying to facilitate the process here that can really take us through and allow us to be actively engaged in all these important United Nations processes. This one I'm going to skip. It is just more details, and it is from the United Nations. You can see how busy they are going to be. We're going to be not as busy as that because it's their process mainly, but we will, at certain points and to the capacity and extent that we as a subnational constituency can and have the will to, we will engage in these processes. But specifically the two substas will be highlights for us. There will be others too, like the IUCN World Congress in 2020 and other such processes, but we won't participate in all of them. You can go to the next slide. Thanks, Tim. Right, so in terms of mainstreaming in the convention, this is something that is quite unique in the United Nations. They really recognize mainstreaming as a very key tool and methodology almost to use in strategizing around biodiversity. So more like, I think, any other convention, they are focused on mainstreaming into different sectors. And we've seen it at their last two COPs where we were present with our summits, and Ingrid will tell you more about that, that they've mainstreamed already. The themes of those COPs were mainstreaming into a number of I think 11 different categories, including agriculture, fisheries, aquaculture, forestry and tourism, energy and mining, infrastructure, manufacturing and processing, and health. And they're also working very closely into mainstreaming and getting further access towards financial support through working with the financial institutions, including the insurance companies and the multilateral development banks and other stakeholders. They also link to the UN system of environmental and economic accounting, and local and subnational governments they regard as natural mainstreamers. And just a word on that. I think nowhere else in the United Nations is there such a clear appreciation at the CBD secretariat level for the work that local and national governments are playing. And that is, if you look at the body of decisions that have been adopted at the last couple of COPs. And Ingrid is going to go into that a little bit more for you. But in terms of the CBD Informal Advisory Group on Mainstreaming, that is a unique group that is being set up at the moment. And we're really hoping that there will be local and subnational representatives serving on that group. And hopefully by the next webinar, we will have that news confirmed. But with the aim of that mainstreaming group will be to support the executive secretary and the bureau in facilitating adoption by 2020 at COP15 of a feasible, well-crafted, coherent, well-accepted and catalytic long-term strategic approach for mainstreaming biodiversity as an integral part of the post-2020 framework. And here they're talking about the global post-2020 framework. 2020 is really going to be the Paris moment for biodiversity, and it's often referred to be that as well. China certainly is fully behind it, and we can look forward to a very active period ahead of, and a very fantastic time at the COP, where we are planning to hold also a major subnational and local government summit, again with our partners, Energy for SDE, for Sustainable Development, as well as the Committee of Regions and a host of other role players. So please mark that in your calendars. The end of 2020, we really want all of us, or our entire constituency, to be with us in China, so that the voice and the statements that we're bringing into the process can be heard loudly and clearly by all the parties. They're going to use a lot of sources of documents. I'm not going to go through all of them, but as you can see in the previous slides, there are many processes underway that are gathering information from national reports, from regional consultations, and from other sources. And these will all inform the process. And then this slide really is just a layout of how many competitive slots there are. 4 candidates. There were 112 candidates that wanted to be in the open-ended working group on mainstreaming, and only 29 slots. But here we have basically, we know that 1 slot is going to be almost earmarked for local and subnational government. So we're keeping fingers crossed there that we will be part of that open-ended working group. And then that open-ended working group's feedback will be very key into both the substance, open-ended working group 1 in June 2019, but then also an open-ended working group 2, which will inform a very important conference you can see at the bottom of that slide there, the Trondheim conference in July 2020, which is just a couple of months ahead of the COP. And by that time, and certainly by United Nations General Assembly in New York in September 2019, there will be already an agreement on the table, which can just be ironed out in further detail when we get to China towards the end of the year. So we can move to the next slide. Thank you, Tim. This slide just speaks to what local nationals, we are part of this. And if you speak to the CBC, well, they recognize a very strong role for local and subnational government. It's fantastic. Even stronger. We're going to call for more uptake and stronger mandates from our national governments to help with the decentralization. Arguments are made on this slide. We already, now one is that we already have a very innovative global process, like the Local Action for Biodiversity process, which many of you will remember, and which is preceded by Cities with Nature, which Ingrid is going to talk about more, and Global South projects funded, for instance, by the German ICI mechanism. It's called Interact Bio. The G7 Sustainable Cities program, these are all recognized as pioneers in their field for bringing action and advocacy from our cities and from our subnational governments up to the global level through breaking through the barriers of national governments and collectively form this community we are today. And the question now is, how do we scale up? How do we scale out? And in our H2020 projects across Europe, the same question is being asked. So what I've been witnessing, having been in this process for the last 12 years, is that the upscaling and the outscaling is happening. We're living it. We are seeing it and we are part of it. And we can be very proud which we as a constituency have already achieved and what we are aspiring to. For us, it may seem like common practice, but it is really pioneering for the world, and the nations belonging to the CBD, the signatory nations, all recognize that. There was also the new report that came out at the end of last year, Nature in the Urban Sanctuary report or assessment, and that will further be built upon to look at the critical impacts that local and subnational governments can make, especially also at the city region level, and especially around making these urban-rural linkages. And the third point here is probably the most important one. Subnational constituency, that 2/3 of our budget, biodiversity budget, is spent at the subnational and local level. So we strong ambitions, and the world is waiting for those strong ambitions to feed into the post-2020 framework. Thank you, Tim. Next slide. And this is where I say thank you very much. Oliver is going to do his own presentation on his own slides later this afternoon. You will have a recording of this recording, but also of his. So thank you on behalf of Oliver. It was a pleasure to present him. Over back to you, Tim.
Great, thank you for that, Purvi, and thank you for standing in for Oliver. Sorry, we just want to apologize for there might have been a delay or a slight connection issue at certain parts in the presentation. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ingrid Kutsia, who is the Senior Program Manager of ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Centre, to take us through an overview of ICLEI and the CBC, as well as what ICLEI and partners are going to be doing to contribute to the process that Purvi has already laid out. So thanks, Ingrid, over to you.
Thank you, Tim, and good morning to everybody. I'm going to just start off by, for those of you that are not familiar with ICLEI and the CBC, just say a few words. ICLEI has been in this space for many decades, and you can see that we are a world-leading association. We have a very impressive membership of almost 2,000 cities, towns, and metropolises in 124 plus countries across the world, and we are committed to building a sustainable future for our cities and our city regions, and we also have some state members and provincial members and the communities that live in them. So very briefly, what do we do to promote urban sustainability? First of all, we have 5 pathways, of which I'm very happy to say nature-based development is one of the key pathways that we as an organization focus on, and you can see the other 5 listed there. But something that a lot of people don't realize is that ICLEI has a very important global advocacy role, as we are the voice of local and subnational governments. And we have this role and the status within the UN family, and we represent our constituency of local and subnational governments at the UNFCCC, the CPD, and the UNCCD. And we are the only local government network that is accredited as an observer, a part of the local major groups for the 3 Rio conventions. So the CBC is a global program. It's based in South Africa, and we have a dedicated team of very passionate, very well qualified specialists and experts in the field of biodiversity and urban development. And we have a wide range of services and tools that we provide. One of them, you'll see on your slide, the top right-hand corner there, is the guideline that Oliver referred to in his presentation on vertical and horizontal integration within the context of the CBD. And we work not just in Africa, but all over the world. The Interact Bio project that Oliver, for example, referred to in his presentation is a project that is being implemented on biodiversity mainstreaming and vertical integration in 3 different continents. And the countries are India, Tanzania, and Brazil. This is just to show you a list of some of the projects that we've been involved in. This is not a definitive list, but our major projects has been the Local Action for Biodiversity program, which initially started many years ago and was a joint ICLEI-IUCN program. And then more recently, the UNO Rivers, the Interact Bio, and there are many, many more. Purvi referred to some of the Horizon 2020 programs that are run through our European office, and these are just some of the examples. So to come back to our global advocacy role, what we as an organization, networking organization, does is to seek to build the international policy environment that will strengthen local and subnational governments' contributions and role in these major multilateral environmental agreements, so that these all levels of subnational governments are appropriately recognized and resourced to make their rightful contribution. We also have special consultative status at the Economic and Social Council, and through our role as organizing partner of the local authorities major group, we have contributed in various of the initiatives taken at the global level since the adoption of Agenda 21. And then just lastly to mention that we monitor on a very close and direct level what are the outcomes of the various Rio conventions that could be mentioned in Oliver's presentation. Something else that ICLEI has done for the past decade or so is to organize summits that coincide with the CBD COPs since 2008. And these COPs, or these summits, which are held as official parallel events to the COPs, unite all levels of subnational governments from all over the world and provide a platform to engage with the CBD partners and various other agencies in the margins of the COP, and then to make their collective actions known towards the global CBD objectives and targets. And as a result of this intervention from 2007-2008, we've had a range of decisions being influenced to strengthen the role of local and subnational governments. And this and the next slide is just an overview to show you the progression of decisions, starting with COP9. And every year, well, not every year, every time there is a summit, we also come out with a declaration or a communique, which is submitted and presented at the COP plenary and then accepted and adopted. And you will see there, I'll run through the next slide also, that every year there's also been COP decisions that speak to the role of local and subnational governments. And at last year's COP in Egypt, we had an unprecedented number of decisions reflecting to a lesser or greater degree what role local and subnational governments can do. And one of the most important one was the decision in relation to mainstreaming of biodiversity, which was referred to also in Oliver's presentation. So this is just a slide to unpack the roadmap that we as a collective for the local and subnational government constituency have devised, and taking it from COP14 right up into COP15 in 2020, which is going to be held in China. What we've done is to show, is to sort of gather together all the UN-related, the CBD-related meetings and interventions, like the regional consultations, the SAPSTers, the thematic consultations, the IPBES, and those are the ones that are represented in the sort of light mauve color. And then the greener ones are the events and initiatives being taken at the local and subnational government. For example, you'll see there these webinar series, also the Resilient Cities, which is an ICLEI initiative. There's the IUCN World Congress, and there's a few others. The slide is not comprehensive. Obviously, for the purposes of this presentation, we have not been able to put in every detail, and that detail you will find on the timeline in our website. And then just very briefly, the main elements of specifically ICLEI's strategy with regard to contributing to the action agenda that the CBD announced recently on their website, as well as the post-2020 global biodiversity process, is to, as could be mentioned, is to consolidate the local and subnational government constituencies' position, to provide and to communicate regular updates on what's happening at the global and international level, and also with our partners such as NRG for SD, the Goals Group, Committee of Regions, and various other agencies that support and work with us. We are going to be developing a position paper specifically on local and subnational governments' positions and ambitions. We will hold ICLEI events. We will also participate in the events of our partners, such as Goals and Committee of Regions, NRG for SD, also IUCN World Congress. And then together with our partners, we will be convening the 7th Global Biodiversity Summit in China at COP15. And then very importantly, to mention that the Cities with Nature platform, which has been recognized by the Secretariat of the Convention of Biological Diversity as the official platform for local and subnational governments to make their commitments going forward to the post-2020 framework, that we've also set up. So just briefly to show you some context in which all of this is happening is there is the Global Partnership for Biodiversity in Cities, which was established more than a decade ago, and it's grown out of the Local Action for Biodiversity Initiative and its associated committee, which was in the spirit of the Curitiba Declaration on Cities and Biodiversity of 2007. And then in 2011, it was expanded, and there was set up 2 advisory committees, the one on local governments and the other one on subnationals. And we have just since last year, we have revitalized and sort of in a sense almost reborn the 2 committees to strengthen this partnership going forward in consultation and together with the SCBD and our other partners such as NRG for SD. So these 2 advisory committees are again being reactivated to take the discussions and debates forward. Then, as I mentioned just now, we have a dedicated web page which we have activated so far. At the moment, it's been temporarily housed on the CBC website, but we've just recently appointed software designers so that we can migrate it across to the Cities of Nature website. And essentially, this is a platform which gives you a timeline of the events that are happening. It shows also what the discussions are within the negotiations at the global level. It will have information on our past and future summits. And then it has what we talk about, call the commitments page, which is where local and subnational governments can make their commitments. This webpage we have developed in consultation and collaboration with our partners and with the SCBD. The webinar series, I think Tim did mention in the beginning that we're going to be holding these monthly. And the idea of these webinars is to keep our constituency informed of the various consultation processes and the negotiations around the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the CBD's action agenda, and then of course the roadmap of the local and subnational governments. What are the actions and etc. All of the things that we're doing, as well as we will then have a range of different themes and topics. One of the things that we want to talk at in one of our later webinars is, for example, the whole discussion that's ongoing at the moment around the links between the climate and biodiversity conventions. We'll give feedback on the regional consultations. We'll talk about issues around vertical integration, biodiversity mainstreaming, what's happening at the SAPSTAs, etc. And the idea is that we have 2 webinars on the same day so that we cover different time zones. And the people that attend these webinars will get the same presentations and the discussions and the issues raised in those webinars will be distributed to both groups. And then if you want to register for the webinars, you can go to our webpage, and the links and the dates are on the timeline. So this is just briefly to show you what the timeline looks. This is not an active thing. For the purposes of this webinar, we haven't made this active because it would be too complicated. But you can, if you follow the website, you will be able to see, go into those different pages. We also will start planning having regular email updates to the people that are registered on our mailing list, just to share the information and keep them up to date with the latest discussions and debates and news events. Cities with Nature is our flagship program at the moment. for engagement with local and subnational governments in relation to how cities can work with and plan with nature, and then and it has various components. It has a registry where we have the pathways that cities can follow, as well as a knowledge and research hub, which we are busy constructing at the moment, and a social media engagement platform, which is also one of the things that we're working on. But the important thing about the Cities with Nature is, as I mentioned just now, that the CBD recognizes the platform Cities with Nature as being the platform where they want local and subnational governments to make their commitments and to express their ambitions for the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And at the moment, you can access that through the post-2020 webpage that we've got on the CBC website, and it will, within the next couple of weeks, probably a month or so, we will make an announcement that it has migrated across to Cities with Nature. And we're working closely with the Secretariat of the CBD on how to formulate and how to present the commitment page so that it feeds into their process. And this is just a sort of a summary in a nutshell of the history of global advocacy in the biodiversity space, and how it arose and where we're going to. So you can see on the left hand, we've got all the dates going up, and then we've got, we've made the links, for example, with the Millennium Development Goals, the SDGs, and where they're taking things further. Then in the middle, just to the left of the big sort of purple block in the middle, we have the lab program, which was the beginnings of a lot of what we have been seeing now, which was sort of gave birth into the Cities with Nature, and also the links to our post-2020 platform. And then the focus in the middle, it just shows you what's happening at the global level, which the big year there was around, for local and subnational governments, was around 2011, when the Nagoya Plan of Action for local and subnational governments was adopted, and at the same time the strategic plan for biodiversity and the IT biodiversity targets, and now moving into the post-2020 phase. And then just the summits, you can see we haven't identified all of the summits, but the major milestone summits, and then those, how they link to the various COP of the time. Right, and we've got to the point where we can take questions and discussions, and I will hand back now to Tim. Thanks.
Great, thanks for that, Ingrid. For all those who are in attendance, we're going to take some questions now. So as I said before, there's two ways in which you are able to ask questions. The first is by typing in the chat box, and the second is by raising your hand. So I don't know at this point if there are any questions. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ryan Fisher, and he will facilitate the Q&A with support from Julia in our board secretariat. So yeah, we will be taking questions at this time.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Tim. I'm just looking at the questions and chat forms, as well as the dashboard for any raised hands, and there doesn't seem to be any. Maybe we should just give it a few seconds.
Yeah.
Ryan, if I can come in here, this is Kirby. If there are no questions at this point, that's perfectly fine. I think we just want to make sure that everybody in this webinar understands that these webinars are going to cover different topics every month related to building up a consolidated voice of subnational governments. And then a specific request of the CBD Secretariat that ICLEI and our colleagues that are most active in this space work together. And we've already mentioned that we'll closely with NRG4SD, the Committee of Regions, but by no means is this a closed process only, and it will not focus on ICLEI's work necessarily. We're not doing this for ICLEI. We're doing this we're facilitating the process, but we're doing this for the constituency of local and subnational governments and their organizations, and as we say, their friends and allies and partners that we work with. So please feel free to join these webinars and actively participate. And you can also indicate to us if you have a strong opinion or a strong input that you would like to make, a contribution that you would like to make in terms of shaping and forming our collective position that we take to the parties 2020. Please let us know. You can reach each of us and we will give you a speaking slot in one of these webinars. You can also approach us for thematic issues on the webinars that we could build into the program. So we want to create a participative, open access process. All of these will be recorded, and all of these will also be made available on our website. It is important that we as subnational governments come together and have a strong voice, a strong presence, and come forward with the innovation that the CBD has come to expect from us, but that the world also needs right now. Because whatever deal is made in 2020 in Beijing for a post-2020 biodiversity framework agreement will have to filter down and will have to be done largely at subnational and local level. So our voices are incredibly important in this process. I just wanted to re-emphasize that again. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for that, Kobe. Yeah, again, I'd like to just open the floor and give the opportunity if there are any questions. I see there have been some comments or statements from Teru, and thank you for those, Teru. We are so thrilled that you were able to join us. Teru is from Goals, who's also one of our partners in this process. And yes, we agree, email news will be very useful and needed. So thank you for joining us, Teru. I think we can give it another minute or so, and then if there are no questions at this time, then we can close the webinar for now. Okay, everyone, that's it for now. As we mentioned before, we will be repeating this webinar, and Oliver Hillel from the SCBD will be joining us in place of the presentation Kobe gave this morning. And that our next webinar today is happening at 3 p.m. South African Standard Time, which is GMT +2. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for availing yourselves, for logging in. We welcome your contributions throughout the process, as Kobe has already reiterated. And we will, just a reminder that we will send the recording of the webinar as well as the presentations in the coming days. So at this point, we just want to thank you and hope that you will join us for our next webinar in May. So have a good day, everyone, and thank you for joining.